So, you want to produce your songs faster. Now, while there are many factors to this, and you can't just magically produce songs twice as fast by wishing it to be so, there are many things that you can do that will radically shave off time on your producing sessions that will allow you to finish your songs faster. I'm at a place in my own career where I literally have to be able to produce finished songs under extremely tight deadlines because I'm working on writing and producing for briefs for television and also releasing songs every other week on my own artist project, not to mention the other work that I have. So let's do it. Number one is to create templates. I used to really hate templates because I felt like making templates would somehow make my music start to sound the same. But the truth is that I have my go-to sound libraries, my go-to plugins that I use in virtually every session, whether I use a template or not. So why on earth would I not create a starting point that saves me time? Every DAW has the ability to create templates, but here's how I do this in my DAW of choice, Logic Pro. I'm simply going to create a new project, go ahead and add in all the sound libraries that I tend to use the most. I'm going to create effects channels that are going to speed up my workflow. So I'm going to make a room verb for vocals, a hall verb for vocals, a reverb for my strings, delay for vocals, whatever your go-to effects and sounds are, just go ahead and add those in now. Now, when I actually produce the song, I'm likely going to need to modify these settings, but now I no longer need to create any of this from scratch since it's already been made. I'll create a bunch of instances of Battery 4 for drums, load up my go-to piano libraries, whatever other libraries that we need, and make it so that when I start a new session, I can just jump straight into making music instead of spending 20 minutes loading up instruments and finding sounds just to get started. Now, once I finish doing that, I'm going to go up to File, Save as Template, and name it whatever I'm going to remember for the future. Now, one of the ways that I make sure that my songs don't all sound the same is by making sure that I'm using these sounds as simply just a starting place. These are placeholders that I'm eventually going to change and maybe find more unique sounds later on when I have the production more or less laid out. I just finished producing a song for a major movie trailer brief, and in those types of cases, I have very little time to be messing around, so starting with a template can easily shave off half an hour or more. And you can obviously make as many templates as you need based on the style that you're working on or based on the types of sounds or vibe you're going for. So make as many templates as you need and you'll be on your way. Number two is to sketch your arrangement quickly. One of the biggest time savers is making the biggest decisions right away and not getting bogged down in the details, which we'll talk about here a little bit later. But that first 1 to 2 hours of working on a song is often about getting the big picture put together because you're pressed for time and you can't be getting sucked into the details of how that transient on your snare sounds in verse 1 when you haven't even figured out the chord progression for verse 2. One of the first things I do when I'm writing and producing a song is I will lay out the entire song from a structure perspective, and I typically do this with a piano or whatever that primary instrument is going to be. I'm almost always just going to copy and paste those chord progressions to create new sections. And before you go tell me that copy and paste is horrible and you shouldn't be doing that, I agree. I don't copy for the final production. I'm simply doing this to be able to visibly put the whole arrangement into perspective. I'm later going to replace those with the actual performances that are going to be on the song. So if you have a chord progression and a melody for a verse and a chorus, before you start jumping into the detail work, just go ahead and copy and paste those sections and determine if that verse is going to be the same length as verse 1, or if it's going to have the same chord progression. And if not, make those changes and then move on. One of the biggest time-wasting activities is starting on detail work too soon. If you don't even know what verse 2 is going to be, then you might be doing all that detail work just to realize it doesn't sound good in the context of the whole song to begin with. So context matters a tremendous amount, and you cannot have context if you don't first have that whole song laid out in front of you. You can start on the detail work once you're actually ready to start on the detail work. Number 3 is figure out when you are the most creative. Now, this might sound a little strange, but with over 15 years of doing this, I can confidently tell you that if I'm trying to do heavy creative work at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, it's not going to be nearly as effective as if I do that same work at 7 in the morning. I spend a lot of time figuring out when I feel the most creative and feel mentally able to do the heavy creative work, and it makes an enormous difference. And this can obviously change over time and based on life circumstances. I used to be a night owl and do most of my creative work late at night, but now I have 3 kids and a family, so my evenings are devoted to being a husband and a father, and I just get up early now. And over time, things have changed, and I find that I'm by far more creative right away in the morning. So I usually get up between 6:30 and try to be in the studio and working well before 7 a.m. This is likely not going to be the same for you, which is why you need to find out when that time is and leverage it. I can do in 1 hour at 7 a.m. what would probably take me 2 hours at 3 p.m. And it's because as the day goes on, I mentally fade and I get tired and fatigued. So I organize my days so that I do all my creative work in the mornings and all my administrative work in the afternoons. That's when I'm going to handle the emails, meetings, I do my workouts in the afternoon, and all that other stuff that doesn't require me to be creatively in the zone. People think that because I'm a full-time music producer, that means maybe I'm producing 10 hours a day, and that's just not reality. I'm usually getting all that heavy work done in the mornings. I usually am only actually producing half the day. Find when you work best and make sure you hit it hard at that time. Number 4, remove distractions. We live in a time unlike any other time in history where we have more distractions than ever. Social media, text messages, emails, YouTube videos, you name it. We have distractions that will absolutely kill your ability to work fast. I have times in my day where I set my phone to do not disturb, my computer to do not disturb, so that way I don't get any texts or phone calls or any other notifications, because the time I have to work is sacred and one small interruption can literally take 15 to 20 minutes to get back into the groove. Now imagine having multiple distractions per session. How much can you really get done if you're constantly switching from making music to responding to a text message? And I am definitely guilty of this at times. I have to catch myself, and when that happens, I have to reorient my brain and realize that I have work to do and I cannot afford the time it takes to respond. If your friends can't wait an hour or even a few hours for you to respond, then you might just need to tell them that this is the new normal and they've got to deal with it. People who are working on big things typically don't respond to me right away because we're working on big things. Remove those distractions and I promise you, you'll get much more done in a faster period of time. Number 5 is top-down workflow. I don't know if I've ever really heard anyone call this, but this is what I call it when I focus on things in a top-down mentality. And we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but here's what I mean. Top-down workflow is when you focus on things that make the biggest impact on the song and then work your way down into the things that make the smallest difference last. And this is really crucial if you want to work fast, because when you're working fast, the goal is to finish something, right? And if you're working on something that the average person won't even know is happening, you got to ask yourself, how important is that thing really? For example, spending 20 minutes shaping the transient of a snare makes way less difference than producing those primary instruments. This is obviously just an example. I think you can fill in what your tendencies are. Most producers have a huge problem with focusing on things that just simply don't actually matter in the big picture to your listeners. I try to work in such a way that if I were to show someone a song that's not mixed or it's not finished, it basically sounds finished because I stacked all of my work on the things that make the biggest difference first. The average listener is not going to hear how you EQ'd the snare or how you compressed that backup vocal. That's just a reality. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do those things. I'm not saying that those things don't matter. They absolutely do matter. What I'm saying is that those things fall simply lower in the hierarchy of importance. And it's funny because I've been, sharing music back and forth with a buddy of mine, Tommy Prophet. Many of you know him as NF's producer. And I recently shared an unmixed song with him a while back, and he was like, "What do you mean this isn't mixed? What else is there to do?" And in my mind, I knew there was a fair amount left to do, but since I tackled the most important things in the producing stage, those mixing decisions are not nearly as important to a listener. And that's sharing with a top-tier producer, not an average listener. So when I'm working on a production, I focus all my attention on the big choices that the everyday listener is going to notice first, and then work my way down as I get things sounding great. And this is also a great way of making sure that you feel the flow and energy of the song happening as you make it. Like if you spend 30 minutes EQing a sound, like that's 30 minutes you just spent on something that's really not going to make you actually feel creative. I mean, does anyone actually feel creative just tweaking EQ? I know I don't. Instead, spend that time working on things that make you feel like the song is actually being built. Like work on the EQ thing when things already sound killer. And by then, I mean, frankly, you might not even need to do that EQ thing because you realized you didn't need to do it in the first place. I cannot tell you how often I want to do some detail thing that I skip over so I can just focus on the big picture. And then I realized later on that that detail thing doesn't even matter now. If you want to see a completely free workshop I made where I actually cover my production workflow from start to finish, then you can click the link right here. I have it in the description and the top comment as well. This workshop already has helped thousands of producers build their songs faster and more efficiently. And if you focus on these 5 things we've talked about here, I think you're going to find yourself making songs significantly faster than you've ever done before. I'll see you in the workshop.